Welcome to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. Our goal is to help you maximize your church's potential. You'll hear from top leaders in children's, student, and family ministry about the principles and practices they use. Now here's your host, Nick Blevins.
Hello and welcome to episode 176 of the podcast. It is the last final episode in this Volunteer Bootcamp series where we've been asking questions that we didn't get to in the live Volunteer Bootcamp event with Ministry Boost some months ago. And we wrap it up with Kreisher talking all about how to retain volunteers. And if you have heard of Christine, you've probably heard of her book, Stop Recruiting, Start Retaining. So this is something she gets to talk about a lot. And we asked some questions in this podcast episode that we couldn't get to during the live event. So you're going to hear a snippet of Christine's talk from the Volunteer Bootcamp event. And then I'm going to ask Christine some questions that we weren't able to get to. Now, before we do that, I'm really excited about a few things we have coming up with Ministry Boost. 3 webinars, 3 online events that are all free. One is this week, if you're listening to this when it comes out. It's all about creating sensational ministry environments. Now, all of our webinars are available for replay, so if you miss it, you can always go check it out. But you'll want to sign up just in case, so we email you with that replay. It's happening Thursday, January 23rd, this Thursday, if you're listening when it comes out, 12:30 p.m. Eastern. We just added a new webinar about keeping kids safe online. We're excited to share with you a bunch of resources and a framework that you can use in equipping parents in your church to help them keep their kids safe online. That's Thursday, February 6th, 11:30 a.m. Eastern. And then the big one that we're really gearing up for is all about developing leaders, a pipeline and a plan for growing your ministry team. It's Wednesday, February 12th, 1 p.m. Eastern. We're going to announce some big things with Ministry Boost, in addition to talking about how you can develop leaders, including yourself. If you lead staff, your staff, all of us lead volunteers. We'll be talking about that as well. Now, I mentioned the first webinar about creating sensational ministry environments. We're going to talk about something, a tool, a resource that I pretty much guarantee you've never heard of. 99.99% of you have never heard of, that I think you're going to use in your church when you hear about it. So if you do miss that webinar, go back and listen to the replay. If you're on my email list, I'm going to email you about it. It's something we're switching to in our church, and I'm loving it. It's great. I think you'll love it too. So you don't want to miss that. You can get all that information at ministryboost.org. And as usual, you can get the show notes for this episode at nickblevins.com/episode 176. But let's go ahead now and listen to that snippet from Christine and then ask her some questions about retaining volunteers.
So I've loved this. I've been sitting through everything and learning a lot from some really amazing friends and incredible ministry leaders and experts. And so it's a lot of pressure being the last person, because so much of what I was going to say was already said, but what's worth remembering is worth repeating. And so I will, I'll talk, maybe expand upon a few things. But one of the things Nina said right out of the gate, I loved it. I wrote it down. She said, recruiting is important, but our emphasis is always on retaining. Improving volunteer culture needs to be our first step and our first priority. And I think that that is so incredibly true, because you can be the best recruiter. I heard somebody say, some people are just natural salespeople. You can recruit anyone. You could sell ice to an Eskimo. But if you don't have a sticky, thriving, life-giving, fun, irresistible volunteer culture, you are going to burn out, because the revolving door of volunteers is exhausting. And so we've got to make retention a priority. We've got to make creating an irresistible volunteer culture our first priority, because once you recruit them and you get them in the door, you want them to stick. You want to be able to retain them. I like it too. I've been in business my whole life, and I've had a cafe for 25 years. Last month was 25 years. My husband and I have been on that venture together. And I have found it to be so true that once you get a customer and you do your best to retain that customer and make them feel known, and you do everything you can to go above and beyond and create an experience that makes them feel like they want to keep coming back, doing that work up front is so worth it. Because if you're constantly having to market and solicit for new customers, it is just exhausting. And so the same principle applies. I wrote a book with Darren Kaiser and Steph Whitaker called The Volunteer Project, Stop Recruiting, Start Retaining. And Darren, in all of his incredible research, found that there were 4 things that every volunteer needs. And we talked about so many of them. We talked about providing first class support. So as we lead volunteers, we've got to make sure, just what Kenny talked about with onboarding, and then when Dan talked about just having that training in place, and it's on the calendar, and we're making sure that volunteers have what they need. We need to celebrate their significance. And we talked a lot about this. Paula talked about this as well, as like collecting stories, celebrating stories, sharing stories, helping volunteers connect what they do, their role, their volunteer role, with the mission of the ministry. And then we need to empower their passions. And that was so good. I just think that last session on empowerment was key. That having that coach level system in place to care for volunteers is so important. Never under challenging volunteers. We make a lot of assumptions for volunteers. We make a lot of decisions for them. They're too busy. They've got too much going on. But don't do that, because you rob people of the opportunity to lead in a way that is so meaningful and significant in their lives. And then the last thing that we talk about is the fourth thing is fueling meaningful connections. And I just hope that if you're listening to this, you do not underestimate the power of connections, the power of relationships. Research proves that every volunteer comes to us with an unwritten or unspoken social contract. And that social contract is they believe that if they volunteer, they are going to make friends. Now, we didn't sign that contract. We didn't agree to that contract. But if we want to retain volunteers, we have got to fulfill that expectation. We have got to help them connect with other volunteers, connect with that coach level leader that can help them really feel seen and celebrated and known and trained, and all the things that we've already talked about. The other thing that I think it's important to know is research also shows that volunteers will stick it out when there are staffing transitions or programming or curriculum changes. They'll stick it out if they're connected to a person, if they have a friend. And sometimes we feel like we have to connect them to everyone, and that is virtually impossible. And that's because it is. Our volunteers are not going to be best friends, not all of them, right? And so, but it's our job to make sure that we're fueling and we're being intentional about helping volunteers to connect to one another. Because when things get tricky, when things get sticky, when there's transitions and when there's tough things or changes that are coming, if they've got those friends, they will stick it out. So how do you do that? I think that's important, right? It sounds great in theory. Great, let's just help, everybody make friends. But I think we can be intentional in that by in a couple of different ways. First of all, I think it's acknowledging, as we just talked about with John, you cannot be all things to all people. You are not Superman. You are not Wonder Woman. As much as I like to believe that I am, I'm not. And so we need to have that, be mindful of that span of care. For every 8 to 10 volunteers, there needs to be somebody that sees people, that is shepherding the volunteers, caring for them, and caring about their spiritual health as well, and to make sure that they're growing in that area as well, because that's the most important thing. It should be a catalyst for spiritual growth on that volunteer role. So I would encourage you to identify one person who it is their primary thing, their primary role to connect volunteers, especially new volunteers when they come onto a team. Who's your connection guy or who's your connection girl? So think about the person who loves people, who seems to know a little bit about everybody on a volunteer team. The person that takes an interest in people's lives, the person that there just needs to be a natural born connector, and then give them the charge, develop them into your connections person so that they know a little bit about everybody on the team. So when a new volunteer comes in, we call it a test drive. When they come for the first time, they're test driving. They can get to know that person just a little bit and then connect them to just one other person. It does not have to be everyone, because that seems really daunting. But sometimes that we underestimate that one-on-one connection. And then I would say to develop and empower those coach level leaders. We talked about job descriptions. I think the key thing, and Paula talked about this as well as John, they're the people that are making sure they're shepherding that 8 to 10, those 8 to 10 volunteers, making them feel known, celebrated, and trained. We use something called What Floats Your Boat. And we have a website, stoprecruiting.com. And that form is on there. There's some free downloadable resources on that website, stoprecruiting.com. One of those things is a coach job description. And then one of the things also is a form called What Floats Your Boat. Every single one of our staff members and every single one of our volunteers fills out that form. It just helps us to get to know them a little bit better, helps us to get to know what makes them tick, what makes them feel appreciated, and some of the questions are silly, like favorite candy bar, favorite drink at Starbucks. But those are things you want to kind of have in your back pocket, and your coaches want to have in their back pocket to be able to specifically praise and appreciate a volunteer. The attaboy, the pat on the back, that's great. But if you can send a handwritten note with their favorite candy bar, or you can show up with their favorite latte or something like that, they forget that they filled out that form, and it's kind of that, wow, how did you know? How did you know? And it just makes them, again, it's that specific praise that makes all the difference and makes it feel, there's a difference between praise and flattery, right? Flattery falls flat. But praise, when we're specific in our praise, that's where it's really, really received. And I think that is really important. So how do you measure if your volunteers are feeling connected? I think that one of the biggest things is if you hear them laughing, if you see them getting together offsite, it's not something that you planned. If they show up on time. Huddles is something, we talked about this several times, but can I just spend a minute talking about this? I have been a part of thriving huddles. I've experienced thriving huddles, and then I have also shown up for something that was called a huddle, but felt more like a funeral. And that is a little harsh, but it's true. So I felt like it was important to create a win statement for huddles. And so this is just something that we use here in all of our huddles. Every single one of our ministry teams huddles up 30 minutes before each service, and it is fun. It is fun. Volunteers already have jobs. Most of them already have jobs. They don't need another one. So what can you do to make it fun? If it's fun and it's meaningful and significant, they will stick. So let me read this win statement to you. For us, a huddle is a 7 to 10 minute focused, high energy mini pep rally to cast vision for the day, build team morale, communicate any last minute changes, and pray for the day. It's not a time to go around. There's 10 people standing around taking prayer requests, because that can get really, really heavy. That's what small groups are for. That's what other opportunities are for. But in this, keep it focused, keep it high energy. You can still pray for people when you know that there's prayer requests, but the leader of that huddle just goes around and says, hey, let's keep in mind this is coming up for Tom, and we want to just keep him in prayer this week. So that's how you kind of keep it focused. That's how you keep it intentional. That's how you keep it fun. It's supposed to feel like it's that pregame huddle, getting in there, getting ready for the day. It also connects one another. We always do a team building activity, short, quick, kind of icebreaker, a team building activity that just really, really connects people to one another and just reminds them, why are they doing what they're doing? We also share testimonies. We share stories in huddle quick. We want you to know that this story of life change happened last week because of what you do. Those stories of baptism, the people that you're going to see be baptized today, if it wasn't for you and you serving, that would not be possible. And so it's just reminding people constantly of the significant role that they play. I don't think we can ever underestimate that. And then I think Nina said it at the beginning, we've got to give our volunteers a voice. I heard John Acuff say years ago, read less minds, ask more questions. Listen to your volunteers, but don't ask them if you're not going to respond. Doesn't mean you're going to change everything and make implement every suggestion that they make, but let them know that they are heard. Let them know that you heard them, and maybe you're changing as a result of what they said. Or maybe you're not, and tell them why. Give them the why behind it. Help them to understand the vision behind why you do what they do. But making them feel heard and feel known makes all the difference. I think that's really, really important.
Okay, Christine, thanks so much for sharing about volunteer retainment. And so, it's kind of a recap here. Somebody listened to the snippet just now on the podcast. They're going to get some of this. Hopefully they'll go listen to the full thing if they didn't catch it live. But just to kind of recap, why is retainment so important, potentially more important than recruiting?
Yeah, I love this question because I think so many times in ministry, and I've done it too, right? And so many years of serving with volunteers, I put so much emphasis on recruiting, just need more volunteers. But retention should always trump recruitment. If you like to work smart instead of hard. So if you like to be exhausted all the time, then go for it. Keep recruiting. And don't focus on retention. But it really takes so much time. I mean, think about it. To identify a volunteer, to recruit a volunteer, and then to train them than it does to keep them, especially if you do the work now to really build an irresistible volunteer culture. So you do that work now so that you can keep your volunteers. I've been in business basically my whole life. I've always been a serial entrepreneur. And I have found that to be true with customers. Right? I have a cafe. If I work really hard at getting to know their name and to create a really great environment for them and where they feel welcome and they feel like they belong and they keep coming back. And then I don't have to spend the marketing dollars to get more customers, and I don't have to do all of the work to convince them to come back. It just kind of becomes their place and their thing. And so I think I've found the same thing to be true with volunteers as well. And then I guess the best part about that is if you really do the work to create the irresistible volunteer culture and your volunteers love it, they're going to invite their friends. So then they're going to do the recruiting for you. And again, that's as a ministry leader, you want to work smart instead of working hard. And so that's just one other way to do that.
Yeah, I think about a couple of years I worked for Northrop Grumman, a national defense contractor, big company, and especially with like clearances and stuff like that, they would tell you it costs like $100,000 to $150,000, to go through the whole process, recruit and hire someone.
Yeah,
and so for that reason too, they would pay like referral fees, think like headhunting thing. If you could recruit other people you knew to the company, because that would bypass and while they're paying good money. I mean, I had a friend one time got, I think, $5,000 because he got somebody hired, and that's a lot of money. And part of it is because it saves them, 20 or 50 or whatever it is, trying to recruit their normal way. And I don't know, I'm trying to think now, like when I was there, I don't know what they would have told you they spend on retainment, but like in the church world, you could see where that'd be similar. Like, you're going to focus energy and time and effort and dollars on the volunteers you have, but it's way more, cost effective, than continuing to recruit while the back door is open and people just keep leaving.
Right. Because those soft costs are much higher, right? Than the tangible cost, the soft cost of just the energy that it takes to really like pour into somebody and train them and get them up to speed on things and to invest in them so that they get the culture. And it's so much better to focus on retention.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that has been talked about on almost every session and questions have come up in almost every session. I joke that it's like the unofficial theme of the Volunteer Bootcamp is huddles, volunteer huddles. And you're one of the first people I ever heard talk about it years ago in different, maybe it was at the Orange Conference or something like that. And people always want to hear about it. They want to know how to implement it. They see kind of the power in it. And then if you do implement it, you really see the power. But your like definition of it was really good. You said a huddle is a 7 to 10 minute focused, high energy, mini pep rally to cast vision for the day, build team morale, communicate any last minute changes, and pray for the day. Mm-hmm. So what are some examples of things you do? Because some of the questions that came in were like, I'm not sure what to do here. How do I start this? We do one, but it's not great. So what are examples of things you do in a huddle that are high energy and cast vision and build morale?
Yeah, I love to talk about this because I think it is one of the most underestimated parts of the volunteer experience. And I think it's one of the most life-giving. And it's one of the key strategies for retaining volunteers. And I think because it's only 7 to 10 minutes, we underestimate it. But when we do it well, it has tremendous impact. I started huddles years ago because I heard Sue Miller talk about it at Orange, or maybe it was even Children's Pastors Conference so many years ago. She called them VIP, vision, information, and prayer. And I remember saying to our team at that time, I think I was a volunteer leading ministry here at our church. And I remember saying, hey, I think we should implement this VIP thing. And everybody kind of looked at me and they were like, you're nuts, right? Like, you can't get them to come on time. And but once we started to do it and do it well, where it was high energy, where it was very focused, and it was an opportunity for volunteers to connect with one another, I think we can't miss that either, because that was the other thing. I was looking at our volunteer team, and this was specific to kids ministry at the time, and I had great small group leaders, but they didn't even know each other because they were coming late, they all just felt like, they were alone on an island. And so the huddle really shifted that culture and really created more one-on-one connections that built that team morale. So we implemented, first of all, I would say we send out a weekly communication, which I would imagine most ministry leaders do that, right? Just kind of checking in, send curriculum and just reminders and things. But the reality that we found, and maybe y'all are different, but nobody was reading them. right? It's like,
What?
okay,
Nobody
another.
reads our emails? I don't know what you're talking about. They read every word.
Like,
Every word. Yeah.
of course. Well, we started actually making that part of it a competition, right? Or we'd put some fun things. So when we started huddles, we would, at the very bottom of the email for that week where we talked about, hey, we want to, see you in huddle this week, we would say, and by the way, if you bring in a paperclip, you'll get a gift card to Starbucks or, something like that. And like one person would do it, and they'd bring it in, and then everybody would be talking about the fact that, wow, that person read their email, and because of that, they got this gift card. And so it made people start reading their emails, and we still do that to this day. And we don't do it every week, but every once in a while we put this little surprise thing in there, or we say at the very bottom, like the first person to respond gets, we make them pretty decent prizes. Say something like, hey, this week in huddle, we're going to be giving away, or we're going to be, so just looking for those fun elements to just create a little competition and a little bit of excitement. It seems very shallow, just being honest. It really does. Some of the things that we've done to get volunteers to come, they're not super spiritual. They're not, it's just getting them there. And then it's crazy because all of a sudden you hear your volunteers start to say, that's the best part of my day. Like, I can't imagine serving, especially new volunteers, where that's just the culture now. You come 30 minutes early and you show up for huddle. Like, they're like, this is amazing. I love it. We have so much fun. And I get to know the other volunteers. We do team building, little kind of icebreaker or team building activities in every huddle. And usually they take 2 minutes, 3-4 minutes, where sometimes they're just getting to know one another, kind of like those, and they're dumb things. Like, just Google it, Google icebreakers and team building activities, and like people bingo, or, just seriously, like stupid things. But it's funny because they're laughing, and you really want that. You want your volunteers to be engaged and laughing and feel connected and feel good and kind of leave the worries of the week behind and be fully there and all in that day. And so we do things like we'll celebrate volunteers, where we'll say, hey, and we surprise them, right? We'll say, hey, just wanted to let you know, last week, check out this picture. This is a picture of Joey. When Joey saw little Susie walking in, he got down on his knee and he started talking with her, and he remembered it was her birthday. And just look at the picture of the mom's face when she realized like that Joey values little Susie. You know what I mean? And like things like that, as a way to, I think that a lot of times what we want to do when we want to shift culture or create culture, we think we need to just tell our volunteers, you need to do it this way. Right? And kind of, they have jobs. Yeah. Don't do that. Look for volunteers who are doing it well. Celebrate that. And that's a perfect opportunity to do that. And again, quick, but man, it starts to build morale, and it gets people excited and celebrates those wins. I also think taking a minute to share a story of life change in huddles is powerful, right? Like, just talking about like, hey, this parent said this, and because that reminds them of why they're there, right? Or, let me tell you this story about a child who shared this prayer request and talked about, their dad just went to prison, and like what's going on in their lives. And like, guys, this is why we do what we do. Those are just some examples of ways to do that and really create an awesome huddle.
Yeah, that's good. And one of the questions was, specifically, how do you celebrate wins? But one of them, like I said, was kind of phrased. Actually, it's kind of a little bit funny how they phrased it. They said, I've been trying to implement the team huddle. Most of mine have been feeling more like a funeral instead of a pep rally. And how do we move it to less of a prayer time and more of a sharing win time? And I wonder, and I don't know, whoever wrote that question, what they're like, how they approach it. I think though, and I'm wondering what you think. I imagine some people look at it like, well, our huddles are scheduled. They're whatever minutes before the service, and you put a little bit of thought, but not much. That's probably where the mistake is, right? Because it's, even though, like you said, it's a short time, it needs some intentional strategy. Otherwise, it probably will feel like a funeral or kind of bland,
Yeah, that's really true. I think it's with anything, right? If we're not intentional, then it just becomes blah. It's like, meh, okay. And so I think the best. Okay, when I started huddles, I started them, right? So it was me, and I was the one who was intentional and taking the time that I didn't have, just being honest. Like, I really felt like there is no way I could put one more thing on my plate, but I'm so glad I did because it was a game changer. And so initially it was me doing it. And then I began to say, okay, who on this team has more energy than me? Who is more passionate than me? Who is just a really great people person? And I started to then bring that person alongside of me, do the huddle with me, and then I started to give it away. And what happens is, and now all of our teams do that, right? So in our church, every single one of our ministry teams gets together for their own pre-service huddle on a Sunday morning. It started in kids ministry, but then it's just contagious. It went everywhere because our teams felt the effects of it. And so they do it because it works and it really has an impact. And so I believe the best huddles are led by volunteers and it's a great leadership development opportunity too, right? Start to pour into somebody, empower them, like this is yours now. And then when you have multiple people, the fun part is you have multiple people on the team that do the huddle. They always try to outdo each other. So it's like, and then there's this energy around it, right? Like, oh my gosh, how do we outdo last week's huddle? Mm-hmm. And it's a fun, friendly thing. It's obviously it's not a negative competition. It's a really good competition. And it's always like, wow, how can we make this even better? And so sometimes we need to get out of the way. I do think that, and I'll just be honest, I've caught some slack, negative slack, because it's not super spiritual, right?
Yeah.
Because listen, it's 7 to 10 minutes. And so here's the thing. Sometimes it feels like a funeral because it becomes like the sharing of prayer requests. Mm-hmm. Okay. And everybody, and some things are so heavy. And some people don't know how to share a 30-second, even 1-minute prayer request. And so what I found is, gosh, that's not the right environment, because what I ended up having to do so many times was shut a person down. And that felt horrible, sure. Right? Yeah. And so instead of taking prayer requests and opening up for prayer requests, what we do is we say, hey, throughout the week, if you have something you want our team to pray about, send it to us. Like I just got an email today from one of our serve teams saying, hey, so-and-so just emailed and asked us to pray for their sister who's having neck surgery. And so there's time to do that. You could do a Facebook group, right, where you can share prayer requests. And you can also say, so when you hear different prayer requests, as the leader of Huddle, you can say, hey, I just want to remind everybody, let's continue to pray for Blanca because she just had surgery this week. And you know what I mean? Like then that leader is in control and able to just kind of preserve that high energy focused atmosphere and fun atmosphere, because we want our volunteers to go into serving like excited, right? And like, yeah, we're going to do this, like, let's do this. It's more like that. It sounds cheesy, pep rally thing, right? A mini pep rally or pre-game huddle, but it makes all the difference. It really, really does.
One little hack that might help people listening is, and I just think this is where people plan differently. Like my elementary director plans her huddles, one at a time, intentionally, whatever. My preschool director years ago, might be a little different now, because our coaches lead huddles and she kind of directs them to plan that. But there was a time when she wanted to focus on what to do in the huddle, but she didn't want to have to spend time on the icebreaker part, like each week, looking up a new one. So what she did is she kind of batched it, because she came up with, a bunch of icebreaker ideas from searching online, printed them, put them in like a jar. And so that part they didn't even think about. They showed up, pulled it out of the jar, and just did whatever it was. Yep. All her thought went into the wins and the stories and what's the information, what do you need to know. So I thought that was helpful to her, and it even helped her get her coaches doing it too, because again they knew, I'm just going to take this out here and do it, whatever it is. Like I don't have to think it up myself, which was nice. Yeah.
The only thing I would say to that is if you want to kind of take it to the next level, when you can connect that icebreaker or team building activity with a strategy that you want to remind everyone of, or a process you want to remind everyone of, that's not the right word, like a culture type thing. Like, for example, when I think of like the lead small principles, right? So if you want to connect and remind everybody of one particular lead small principle, then you try to find an activity that would kind of drive that home. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah. Like there's a connection, like you can see.
Or if you want to remind Yes. Yeah. So then it's not just an activity to do an activity, but it's actually an activity to drive home something you want everybody to remember, to walk away and remember. So
that's good.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that your ministries do their own huddles. One person had asked, is it one big huddle or does each team? So each of your teams does. Now, is it the entire team? So is it like all of kids ministry or all of elementary, or is it even based, by service or whatever coach leads them? How does that work for you guys?
Yeah, I think the magic number for huddles, anything honestly over a dozen, I think is really big, because it's hard to, sometimes it's depending on your environments, right? It's hard to even hear when there's more that you have to be screaming, so it's nice when you can just like gather less than 12 people around you. Some of our huddles are bigger than that, just based on team dynamics and the inability to break, not having the space to be able to split them. I think it's different for everybody, but 12 is that magic number. I do think that when you can focus on, so we have, elementary huddles, and we have preschool huddles. We have, for, the birth through 24 months huddle. We have our Connect team huddles, first impression team. We have our media huddles, like student men. So they're throughout the building, and basically in just a space where, we can make it happen. I think the best huddles also have coffee and, water and snacks. I think that's phenomenal. That's not always possible. I know some churches do full-blown breakfasts, like every week they've got egg sandwiches, and that's amazing if you have the ability to do that. I think this is just a little tip, but sometimes there are volunteers who don't want to serve, with kids or with students or whatever, but they love the fact that volunteers do. And so I've had volunteers in the past, every week they bake for our huddles, for our kids ministry huddles, and they just bring in fresh baked muffins and breads and all these things. And that's their serve, and they love it. And so if you don't have the budget, or be thinking about that as an idea as well, because that also gets, especially if you have volunteers that have kids, to get them up in the morning, to get them 30 minutes early, and not help them with that, feed their kids. Mm-hmm. It's just an added bonus and incentive for them to get here.
Yeah, that's a concrete example of where you could spend money here, but it costs way less than spending money recruiting more. Again, yes. It's hard to quantify that, but it's just true. Like if you did quantify it, you'd realize how true it was. Usually we don't. Usually we don't quantify it, so you don't really realize it,
Yeah.
Well, let's shift gears a little bit off huddles and talk about this one. If you think about volunteers sticking and retaining and continuing to be part of the team, well, everybody wants their voice to be heard. And so one of the questions was, how do you give volunteers a voice and help them be heard, which of course would lead to them sticking around long term?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so good. I remember John Acuff years ago at Orange say, read less minds, ask more questions.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So sometimes we think we know what our volunteers want and what they need, but we don't. And so give them a voice. And so I think that we should be doing volunteer surveys, anonymous volunteer surveys, at least once a year, if not twice a year. Even if it's as simple as just saying, hey, what's going well? What can we do? Yeah. Or what's confusing? What can we do to make your experience better? Where do you feel you need more training? I don't think we should ever do a volunteer training or event before we do a survey. We should never plan the agenda for one until we do a survey, because let your volunteers speak into what they need so you can give them what they need. So when they show up, they feel like it was worth their time and they want to come back. So many times it's our agenda. We want to tell them what we want to tell them, and they kind of walk away going, oh, okay, well, that's great, but you didn't address what I need to win. And so I didn't feel helped. I didn't feel like it was practical. It wasn't a good use of my time. And so guess what? They just make a, subconscious decision like, yeah, next time I'm picking my kid's soccer game, or I'm picking, whatever. But if you add value to their lives and you add value to their role, they're going to come. They're going to make it.
Mm-hmm. What else do you do to create a healthy volunteer culture where people want to stay a part of it? I mean, you got huddles, you're giving them a voice. Is there anything else you think of that helps create that culture that people are like, it'd be hard for them to, want to leave because they just love it?
Yeah. I think we talked about underestimating huddles. I think the other thing that we underestimate is one-on-one connections. So when I say that, I mean, I think we should be, as ministry leaders, and especially, so depending on the size of your church, right? We have coach level leaders who are volunteers because we want to make sure that every single one of our volunteers has a person, right? They have their go-to person, and it can't be me. It can't be, every staff member. And so for every 8 to 10 volunteers, we have a coach level leader. And that coach level leader is constantly checking in on them and also getting to know them, right? Getting to know their interests, getting to know their hobbies, getting to know about their family so that they can connect. And one of the reasons, this isn't the only reason, but one of the reasons is so that they can know each person and be able to connect one person with one other person. Sometimes we think we have to connect all of our volunteers with one another. We have to make sure they're all friends. But what I've seen over the years in ministry, serving with volunteers, and even from my own personal experience, if I have one person, I feel like I know everybody. Right. And volunteers, when they have their person and they feel connected that way, research actually shows that they will stick. They'll stick through transitions and changes and dysfunction and disorganization and all of the things that sometimes happen. And so I think that's real powerful. I think getting people together on off days, just kind of sometimes we'll say to our volunteers, hey, we're going to the ice cream shop, on 183 this week. Meet us at 7:00 and we're just going to have ice cream. Or we'll do appreciation events where we gather people. We make them really, really fun. I think the other thing that we do is we look for opportunities. I said this a little while ago, but I kind of skimmed over it. Whenever you can add value to a person's life, make them a better follower of Christ, make them a better parent, make them a better spouse, make them a better friend, equip them with tools for life, make them a better boss or employee. That makes them want to stay. It's kind of the glue, right? Because it's like the best compliment I ever got from a volunteer was when she said to me, I got a raise and I got a promotion, and now I'm being asked to speak all over the country at conferences for my job because of the experience, because of the things that you taught me, or that, and my experiences in kids ministry. Those things happened. Or when people say, like, I learned how to have a hard conversation and how to deal with conflict and not run from conflict. And I use that in my job. And that completely changed the culture of my organization, because now we're modeling this great, I'm just that to me it's adding value, and it makes people go, man, that's from church. And so I never want to stop serving because look what it's doing for my life. Sometimes I think we focus so much on how do we make you a better, host? How do we make you a better greeter? How do we make you a better small group leader? And we forget that that's not who they are. That's a part of who they are, but how do we make them better and add value to their lives? I think that's huge.
Okay, last question here. And this kind of is a few questions that were similar and kind of can get lumped in here. But there are several people that talked about, they lost volunteers over the last year or so, and either it was a changeover in leadership or disagreement among volunteers and staff. So, and there are times, right, when, it's actually best for that volunteer to step down for some of these various reasons. Sometimes not, maybe, when there's a changeover in leadership, you should stick around because the new leadership's going to be good and, you should stick in there. But speak a little bit to that situation as it relates to retainment and these kind of unique opportunity, situations where maybe it's good for somebody to step down, maybe not. What would you say to people in that circumstance?
Yeah, I've been serving in ministry as a volunteer and then on staff for 20 years, right? And so I've seen volunteers come and go, and I've seen some come back, right? But I've definitely been a part of times where, whether it was a change of leadership or a disagreement on, maybe it's a philosophical disagreement on the way a leader is running ministry and the volunteer doesn't agree, or maybe it's a curriculum. There's been so many things that I've personally experienced with this that sometimes I think we're so afraid to lose volunteers, and sometimes it is the best thing. It's just like when you think about a job, right? When it's not a good fit, or somebody cannot align with the mission, they can't align with the values, they need to go. same thing in church, right? Like sometimes churches change and people start to say, I don't like things this way. Well, guess what? It's okay. We don't always have to agree. And sometimes you have to go and find your fit, or you have to go and in order for you to thrive, right? And in order for the culture of our volunteer team to thrive. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think sometimes that's the best thing. Sometimes I think we hold on to volunteers too long. Sometimes it's not a volunteer stepping away. Sometimes I think we need to ask them to step away. And then we're like, what? That's crazy.
Yeah. Firing
right?
volunteers.
Right.
Yeah.
It's church. We can't do that. Yes, we can. And I've done it. And I've done it in a very healthy way. Volunteers give you signs, right? When they stop showing up on time, when they stop showing up consistently, when their attitude isn't what it used to be, that is a great opportunity. And I think it's our responsibility when we see signs like that to sit with our volunteer and say, hey, here are some of the things that, and I don't mean like on the spot, Sunday morning in the midst of crazy. I mean, take them out for coffee and just say, hey, I just wanted to check in with you because here's some of the things that I'm observing. And that's not like you. Is everything okay? I can't tell you. Two things, every time that I've done that, and I've done it many times, two things happen. One is they say, actually, my life is falling apart. My husband left, or, like you'll hear crazy stories, health issues, all of these things. And they just didn't think you had the time for them. So they didn't want to burden you with their stuff. You have an opportunity to come alongside of them. In some cases, an opportunity to just say, you know what, it's okay. Take a step away for a season. Let me help connect you with counseling or, something like that. The other thing that sometimes happens is they'll say, yeah, you know what? I hate what you're doing. I hate the curriculum that you're using. I hate the way that you're programming things. I think it's just, and then you get to hear their heart where they're going, I don't align. And you can say, oh gosh, thank you for sharing that with me. But this is us. This is the way that we're doing things. And it is totally okay that you can't align. And so let me help you find something else. And we need to steward people well because they're a gift. Volunteers are a gift. And so how do we steward them well? How do we help them find their fit so that they can thrive? Instead of just holding on because we need warm bodies, because ultimately that erodes culture.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Well, that's all the questions we have. Thanks so much for doing the Volunteer Bootcamp, talking about retainment, and then for coming back to hit these questions that we weren't able to get to in the live thing. We appreciate it. Thanks, Christine.
I love it. Thank you.
Well, there it is. That wraps up this Volunteer Bootcamp series. Lots of great content. So thankful for all those leaders for helping us learn about recruiting and training and empowering, encouraging, and retaining volunteers like we talked about with Christine. Here are a few action items I think of coming out of that interview and her teaching. One is to get her book, Stop Recruiting, Start Retaining. There's so much great content in there. You definitely want to get that and read it. Two would be to track your retainment, which a lot of churches don't track, but somehow track when people step off the team. And of course, you're tracking, I hope, somehow when people step on the team, so you'll know how many volunteers are you losing in a given year. And then step three, and this one's really hard. This is not like a simple, hey, let's just do this week. Although I don't know if any three of these are, is meet with every volunteer. Like if you want to boost retainment, if you want to keep more of your volunteers, then meet with them. That's a chance to develop the relationship, to hear from them, to encourage them, all of that. And you may not even know what a volunteer is going through personally or in the ministry as they serve. But if you meet with them, you can find out. So those are 3 action steps I think that can help you and me retain more volunteers. Thanks for listening during this whole series. As I mentioned in the beginning, don't miss the webinars coming up with Ministry Boost. We got a lot going on, lots of great resources and things to share with you, some things that we found out that are not ours, but we're starting to use in our churches, and we think you'll love that as well. And then there is some big announcement coming up for Ministry Boost on February 12th, so I hope you'll check out that webinar as well as the others. And as usual, I hope you have a great week. Hope you apply this to your ministry, make a difference with volunteers. And I'm really excited for the future episodes we have because I've been interviewing some leaders. But as this Volunteer Bootcamp series has been going on, we've obviously been focused on that. So I'm excited for you to hear from some other leaders that I've been able to interview recently about children's ministry, about student ministry, all of that. So look forward to that and more. Thanks for listening. Thanks for subscribing, for sharing it. Always appreciate that. And I'll catch you next time on the Family Ministry Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. We hope this helps you maximize your church's potential. We would love to hear stories of how you apply what you've learned. You can do that by leaving a comment on iTunes or in the show notes at nickblevins.com.